The opinions expressed by tonight's guest do not represent the opinions or position of Spaced Out Radio, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with SOR Media. Listener discretion is advised. Here at Spaced Out Radio, we are about to take you higher. Broadcasting from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado to you listening around the world. This is Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. You can follow Tessa on our Facebook page at Spaced Out Radio, on Twitter at TessaTNT, and you can subscribe to her YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio for the archive. But we break on command 'cause women rule the world. Buckle up, space travelers. Let the countdown begin.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's time to go for a ride with host Tessa Nicole Thomas.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening, Spaced Out Radio. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a Rocky Mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 419.9 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, August 19th, Monday, August 20th for those of you on the East Coast and beyond. This is Spaced Out Radio. I hope you all had a rockin' week, an awesome day, and an even better evening. I am your host, Tessa TNT, and I am live tonight broadcasting from beautiful Bayfield, Colorado. We are thousands strong nightly all around the world on Spaced Out Radio Network, spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, Paranormal Radio, TalkStream Live, as well as Deep Talk Radio, which you can find at deeptalkradio.com. Don't forget to head to the website, spacedoutradio.com, where you can peruse the Spaced Out Radio store and read the encounter online, dealing with everything strange, paranormal, and odd. Tonight I have a treat for all my guys and gals out there. Tonight we will be talking to and getting to know Jason Mathis. Jason grew up in Arizona and encountered his first UFO witness when his aunt and uncle, whom took 2 photos of 2 white disc-shaped craft flying somewhere over Alaskan landscape. This led to Jason seeking out Stanton Friedman to show the photos to and discuss them. It all branched out from there, Jason was quoted as saying in one interview. He investigates various subjects from the paranormal to the conspiratorial and everything in between in his spare time. He's a full-time working single father. He has witnessed many personal paranormal and supernatural events, some with witnesses and some without. From time slips to the Mandela effect, he has no explanation for what is going on. All he does know is out of the many thousands of reported similar cases or experiences, something real is happening, and it's not just a forgetful memory of a few million, nor a few million being taught the wrong thing by so many teachers for so many years. He does not accept those explanations. Events like these need to be documented at the very least. Collection of real evidence is another entire matter. The research community must come together if we are to fight the forces within trying to dismantle, confuse, and anger our fellow colleagues. Jason thinks that there are more skeptics in the field now than there was in the past. So Jason, thanks so much for coming on the show tonight. I'm excited and it's great to have you.
Oh, thanks. That's, I was thinking as you read the intro, I said, that's kind of a narrow-minded bio. That's just one aspect of it all. There's just so much when you go through the years and start compiling things. Your library grows and grows.
Yeah, and it's hard to just, get a big picture sometimes of what you want to do for a bio. I know that was really difficult for me when I finally decided to do one, and I had to look online because I was just stuck. I didn't know where to go with it, but I like the one I got now.
Well, especially when your life runs into a hodgepodge of subjects without you really having to do anything with it, other than having to be at certain places at certain times, for knowing or running into certain people. It's where would you like to go? I know you would like to talk about I know we were talking off air a few minutes ago about the medical examiner and ghostly goings on and just strange things.
Well, let's get into where it all began. What was your first paranormal experience in life, and what interested you in this field?
Well, I was about 3, and I lived in Michigan at the time. I was born in Michigan, and we lived in a town called Allen Park. Now, my mother grew up in this house, and as the story went, my grandmother used to astro travel back in the 60s and 70s. Well, when I was 3, my uncle was about 19 or 20, and he was babysitting me. And he said that back in those days, in the hallways of the houses, you would have the cupboards built into the walls. Well, he said on one occasion, the cupboards started opening and closing by themselves. And then my brother and sister would claim that at night, they had bunk beds in the room. They would claim at night that bunk beds would shake violently. Of course, my brother would blame my sister and vice versa. And when it ended up that the shaking would get so violent, my parents would come into the room, my dad would yell, quit that, quiet down. And my siblings would always claim, but the beds are shaking by themselves. So stories like that is when I first remember anything unexplainable going on. I think one of the most fun stories that my father told me, and this is an unusual one because you have to laugh. It's the mid-'70s, and my dad says, yeah, we're all hanging out, and it's me and your Uncle Gary, and he had to get up and use the bathroom, and he was gone for a while, and all of a sudden we heard a commotion come from the bathroom, and I heard him yell, Daryl, help me, I can't get up, Daryl. So he says, I walked down to the bathroom, and I opened it, and there's Gary. He's over the bathtub, halfway in. He's got his pants around his ankles. He's got a big bump on his head. The curtain on the window by the toilet there in the bathroom was all down and on the floor. And my dad says, well, what happened? You can't be so drunk. You lost your balance. He says, no, something picked me up and threw me. He says, what do you mean something picked you up and threw you? I told you your house is haunted. You didn't believe me. Something just beat me up. So that was always a funny one to tell through in our family throughout the story, or throughout the years, because we'd make fun of Uncle Gary about, hey, remember that time he got beat up by a ghost? Because he does, he'd like to, that doesn't go with the normal flow of things, but nonetheless, there were witnesses there at the time. Of course, by the time my dad got there was witnesses and people gathering around and laughing at him and stuff, because he's got his pants around his ankles.
Yeah.
So, and then nothing for quite a few years. I don't that I recall after that, after moving out of that house. It wasn't until you start meeting people later on in life that are into this. They claim to be a Wiccan, but yet they're doing totally things that I'm not a Wiccan, so I wouldn't know. But they're praying and they're doing these rituals and calling up spirits and playing with the Ouija boards and just things that aren't from from what I've seen, advisable. So it's a subject I don't. It gives me the heebie-jeebies, especially what happened to me after working for the medical examiner and living with my friend who was diving into this occultic practice at the time. I mean, he had a whole shrine set up in his room. He had a crystal pyramid where he kept his seals of Solomon. He had all sorts of oils, and this oil does this is a money oil. This is a healing oil. This this is for this. He had a dictionary. It was a book called A Dictionary of Angels, Risen and Fallen by Gustav Davidson, that it was printed in the early 70s. And in the back of this book, it had ritualistic incantations of calling up certain angels, whether they be risen or fallen, at certain hours of the day. So they had a chart in the back of the book that would chart of each hour of each day of what angel ruled over that hour and of the day. And then it would have a spell you could do to call upon this angel to have your will done, basically. And it was a very in-depth, step-by-step thing. And he read this, and he had this penchant for using, these pendulums. I've heard on the show before of some of these mediums talking about using pendulums.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he tried to use one night. He got a map of the world out. Now this is 1999, like November '99. He gets the map of the world out, and he says, "I said, what are you doing?" He says, "I want to figure out where to move in the world." I said, "You're kidding me, right?" So he's trying to figure out where to move, asking this pendulum where to move, and it's swinging. First it goes to Australia, then it goes to, Barbados or some odd little island in the middle of the Atlantic. And I'm thinking, oh, God, are you kidding me? So how much of it is fluff, I don't know. But during the course of my living there, I would see things. Things would be moved in the apartment. I remember coming home one day and there was a lockbox that we had stashed away. My girlfriend at the time put it in the freezer. Why, I don't know. But she thought that was a great idea to put money in the freezer in a lockbox. Well, we came home one night and the lockbox was open, the money was everywhere, and we both went home. So that was one. Another one was people telling me when we would go to this metaphysical bookstore in Phoenix, the owner had once asked me if I worked in a hospital. I said, well, I work around them. Why? Well, I don't know what your religious beliefs are, but I thought you'd like to know there's 9 spirits following you. And I said, yeah, okay. That's not something you hear every day. 9 spirits. What are you drinking? I like to have some. And I said, what do I look like? So she proceeded to tell me the people and describe them. And she was right on all of them. All right. And, well, what can I say? I don't know this lady. She's telling me what these spirits look like. And they were some were violent cases I had, picked up. Some were suicides or car accidents, or one of them was a murder-suicide. But nonetheless, she was spot on. So that's what I gauge when I hear mediums on the radio or even on TV. But then again, how can you can only go by their word. But all I can tell you is she was spot on about that.
Yeah, it's so interesting when that does happen. It kind of blows you away. So this time, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, this time, being around this stuff, was that the same time you're working at the coroner's office or wherever you were for those medical examinations?
Yeah, that was 1999. I worked for the medical examiner from the tail end of 1999 until about midway half, right up until, I'd say, March of 2001. And I lived in that apartment until midway through 2000. It got so bad I had to move because I would come in at night. When I'd work swing shift at the medical examiner, you know, some of the cases would be so violent, you had to process what you saw that day. And so I'd take a bath and I'd listen to Leonard Cohen, and I would hear stuff moving in the kitchen, and I'd be the only one home. I'm like, and I'd yell out, "Please don't mess with me tonight. Just not tonight." Or I would hear what would sound like somebody coming in the door and slamming it, and I think it'd be my girlfriend or my roommate at the time. And I'd get up out of the shop, and there'd be nobody there, you know, things like that. And then it got to be where it escalated to the facts so bad that now in those days when we had cell phones, they were quite expensive. Now back in those days, Cricket started, so that was, you know, great and cheap. So we would be out. I would be out on a call out in the middle of the desert, and my girlfriend would call me, screaming her head off about the spirits she saw in the house and describing them, and not being able to deal with it because here I'm in the middle of work. What are you doing? What do you mean what am I doing? I'm on a case. I can't talk. Well, I just saw this one of your cases that you picked up. I'm like, yeah. and for a long time for a long time she'd tell me this, but she would never elaborate. She'd say, "Oh, you wouldn't believe me anyway." So one day she finally did start telling me what they looked like, and she was right. So I don't know, but see, she was communicating and using all this hoodoo stuff that my friend was doing with their rituals, with their, with their spells and whatever. This book, I don't even know what type of witchcraft it was. All I know was it was causing havoc around my home, and then the weird stuff she would start telling me that she'd started talking to them. Oh, well, they're mad at you. And then she'd start telling me things, what I would be doing in the medical examiner van. Okay, for instance, I picked up a patient who died from a fall or something, and I said, listen to a particular song in the van. A few days later, she'd start giggling out of nowhere, and I'd say, "What are you laughing at?" "Oh, one of the guys that you picked up found it kind of funny the other day, or listening to this one song," and she'd name the song, and I'm like, and she'd be right. So, and I'd say, "Quit messing with that stuff." You know, so on one hand, you had somebody who was dealing with and communicating with the dead, and as she said, fresh spirits. I get fresh spirits because you're picking up fresh dead people. It was very morbid. But she loved it, and my friend liked it because they like to experiment and try to communicate with the dearly departed whom I was dealing with, and they just had no idea. And I had never heard of anybody do it that way. Out of all the people I've heard talk about communicating with spirits or trying to contact the dead, it was happening quite by free flow. If that's a good term, without me having anything to do with it.
Yeah, so do you think, like her messing with that stuff, maybe she was somehow getting them to follow you home, so she had that fresh meat or fresh spirit or whatever?
Well, put it this way, Facebook is a very interesting tool. I had looked her up. A friend and I were talking about her a few weeks ago because we were talking about all these weird things that happened. And it turns out now she's a full-fledged Satanist at the Church of Satan in Phoenix, and a full-fledged member. So there you go. I mean, I'm not saying all Satanists are like that, but you know, at least it seems for her, she went, you know, totally the black side, but. She thought it was funny back then, because we would go to her grandmother's house, and then she'd say, "Oh, they're following us to Grandma's house." like, what? Just shut up. Just leave me alone. You know, I don't want to know. Yeah. And that and other things, even before that, a couple of years before that, right around the time the Phoenix Lights happened, I lived in a haunted house in Phoenix, and this one was haunted by an old guy. And how we deduced that was when we moved in, the owner told me and my friend Tony and his girlfriend that the old man died in the back bedroom. So his mother used one of the room that he died in as a storage room. So she put a padlock on it, and we couldn't get in it and whatnot. So I had the very back bedroom, and Tony and his girlfriend had the back right bedroom. Well, you had instances where pictures on the wall would be crooked or turned upside down. Every picture that had his girlfriend in it would be messed with in some fashion or another. Every time Tony did the laundry, his laundry and her laundry, when he separated it and folded it, he would leave the room, he would come back, and her laundry would be strewn everywhere in the room, but his laundry would be untouched. It just did not like her or any object having to do with her. We saw a shadow being one night in the kitchen. Him and I did. That was kind of in the shape of a hooded figure. That was pretty eerie.
Yeah.
That's the only time I've actually seen a shadow figure full-fledged stand. And it wasn't like he was floating and it was just out of the corner of my eye. No, I turned and looked, and I saw this thing. It's like he got up from the kitchen table, because there was the kitchen window, and you could look out to the side street there. And he got up from the kitchen table, and he stood, and he turned towards Tony and I, because we were in the living room, and you could see the kitchen right there, dining room. And he stood for a moment, looked at us. I looked at Tony. Tony looks at me. We looked back at this thing standing there, and it's still standing there. And Tony says, "Do you see that?" And I go, "Uh-huh." And he says, "It's a shadow person, right?" And I said, "Uh-huh." He says, "You still see it?" And I said, "It's long enough that we're having a conversation, and that's pretty. Look, it's moving. It just moved. It went to the, and it went behind where the refrigerator was." And he says, "Why don't you get up and go see where it went?" I said, "Yeah, you get up." I said, "How about this? You go to the end of the hall," because there was another way out to the kitchen at the end of the hall. I said, "You cut it off." So I said, "You flank it." And we're laughing, but, we saw that one night in his house. And then another thing, I think the only movable object that we saw actually fly was, remember those old toys, the koosh balls, those little fluffy rubbery things?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He had one of those in the shape of a pig sitting on his entertainment center. And back in those days, when you actually had separate devices for your radio and your TV, he had something called an entertainment center. And this thing was sitting up on it. And I had just gotten home from work, and I'm talking to Tony. Him and his girlfriend are sitting on the couch. We're rapping about whatever. All of a sudden, this thing flies off the entertainment center, lands on the floor, and rolls in front of Tony, like right in front of our feet. And Tony said, "That flew, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw it. We didn't. Adriana, you saw it too." "Yeah, we saw it." So it got to be, after a while, it was just annoying. One time I was dating this girl, and she said, we woke up one morning, and she said, "Were you tapping on my forehead last night?" And I said, "Why would I tap on your forehead?" She says, She says, "I felt tapping on my forehead and yanking at my toes." I said, "Why would I do that to you in the middle of the night?" "No, I'm not doing that." So weird things like that people messed with, objects moving, the picture thing. So, and then the Phoenix Lights happened, which was very surreal. So you had the hauntings going on, and then the Phoenix Lights, which we saw. So we can go into that next hour if you want.
Yeah, so you actually got to witness that?
Yeah, we were coming back from camping at a place called Seven Springs back then. And we saw it fly probably for a good 20 to 30 minutes because it was going really slow, and it was on the driver's side in the direction that we were traveling. I can't quite remember. But yeah, it was pretty big. But like I said, that was about the extent of my Phoenix Lights. I'm like, what is that? Is that a UFO? It's that, look at that V shape. So we just watched it as it flew off towards South Mountain.
So it was like a V shape with the lights underneath, or did they go around the side, or what exactly did it look like?
Well, it was right underneath because from the way we were coming off the Beeline Highway, which was Highway 87 going down, let's see, north, which way does that road run? East Shea, east and west, kind of going east on Shea Boulevard towards Phoenix area. You're coming down from Fountain Hills there, and when you're coming down the Beeline Highway, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, you make a right on the Shea Boulevard. And Shea Boulevard is a long way road that goes way for a very long way, several miles. And that's where we saw it. We caught it like right at the Beeline Highway and Shea area, and then that's when we watched it fly. It kind of went off to the south there. You know, it was flying parallel to us while we were driving on Shea Boulevard. And, you know, this is over 20 years ago, so memory's a little hazy. He remembers more than I do, and you know, I don't remember all that much. He remembers a lot. I wish I could talk to him. I haven't talked to him for several years, but that was something. And house hauntings and UFOs, what else do you need going on? You know, so and then other aspects. So, but what more would you like to know as far as?
Well, you were saying with one of your UFO experiences, you went to Stanton Friedman with that. Was that an early experience for you, or what exactly was going on with that situation? Well,
when I was a kid, my grandfather had two pictures of this UFO that he would show me, and one of them was a white UFO hovering over a mountain top, and there was a snow-capped mountain peak, and it was very distinct, and it was taken from the airplane window, and I said, that's a good shot. And he said, well, the second one's not so good. It's a little, the UFO's a little blurry in the distance, and you could see a white disc in the distance, and it's hovering over the pine trees. He couldn't, my uncle could not remember if they were in Alaska or if they were in Washington State, because he said that they traveled so much back in the 70s and 80s that he said we've traveled so much it was, you know, crazy. Because my aunt was a travel agent. So when they got them developed, they knew my grandfather thought that sort of thing was interesting, so they just gave them to him, and then he kept them in his dresser drawer until he died in 1994. And then my grandmother gave them to me, but I didn't get them until about 1998, actually. And, you know, back then I didn't know much about the internet. The internet was still a baby. It wasn't anything like it is now. And I didn't think there was really no place to put it back then. I'm sure there was, but I wasn't computer tech savvy back in those days. I was going to college and working and doing other stuff. So this was just my spare time, fun kind of thing. And Stanton Friedman came out with Top Secret Magic back at the end of 97. And I had that book. Well, it had his phone number in the back of the book. And I said, he says, if anybody has any, you know, experiences, would they give me a call? And I said, yeah, right. He didn't put his number in the book. Well, he actually did. And I actually ended up calling him at his home in Canada. He answered the phone one day. And so I just told him the story about these pictures that I had. And at the time I was going to college in Michigan. and he was speaking at a UFO conference in Romulus. And this was in November of 1998. So he invited me over to the hotel after the conference to show him the pictures and speak with him. So that was on Friday the 13th, November 13th, 1998. And I took my video camera over there, and we talked, and I showed him the pictures. And he let me do a half-hour videotaped interview with him and everything. We discussed Roswell, and we even got into some... Oh, you got some sirens over there?
Yeah, I'm on mute so nobody else can hear it, but you can.
Oh, sorry.
We got some activity going on in the background.
You know what? It's Dr. Johnny Fever. The phone cops. It's the phone cops.
Oh, no. What are we going to do?
Oh, man. See, it made me lose my train of thought, those phone cops. But no, Friedman, he saw the UFO pictures, and he seemed rather impressed. Well, I guess he's so impressed he decided to keep them, and 20 years later he still has them.
Jeez,
and
that was nice of him.
I've asked for them several times over the years. You know, when I've lived in Phoenix, you know, back in 2002, I think it was, me and my friend Dan went and saw him speak at a conference, and I asked him about my pictures. Then again, I think around 2007, and again around 2010 or 9, you know. So every few years I'd ask, and I don't. All he says is, "Yeah, they're at my house." Okay. Well, I would really love for the public to see them because, you know, everybody complains about UFO pictures being fuzzy. Well, that one is pretty darn clear. You know, it's just too bad that I'm just another story of, oh, I had the evidence, but, well, don't blame me. Yeah, you can blame me for being young and naive. I was 23 at the time when I met him. But I didn't expect him to keep my photos for 20 years. And I'm not, you know, I'm a little upset in that regard, but, you know, I understand his position. You know, he's quite a busy man. And I'm sure maybe he has other people's photos as well in files, but I don't know where it is. I guess that's just the thing. I just don't know where they're at. You know, I don't know if they're in his files. I don't know if somebody got a hold of them. They're, you know, in an X file, for lack of a better term. That's why when people come across real evidence, you all have to be careful. You have to be careful of who you trust. And this is nothing against Friedman at all. You know, it could have been an innocent thing. But you really have to be careful about the evidence that you come across as an individual. You know, a lot of people like to harp on Vic Cundiff from Dogman Encounters because a lot of his witnesses send him real good evidence, I hear, and by all accounts. And he does, you know, he has very good ethics and doesn't release it because they're afraid of it. They're afraid of any repercussions. You know, this must be some really good concrete evidence, and I can understand people's fear when you're talking about real evidence, especially with cryptids and things like that. You know, and bring that into any research that you're doing. We can talk about time slips and ghosts and UFOs and, you know, reverse engineering all day long, but until you have the actual real concrete evidence, that's something entirely different.
Yeah, and when it comes to that sort of stuff, what is actual real concrete evidence? I mean, because we get pictures, we get EVPs, all kinds of stuff. It's not like you can, you know, grab it and be like, come on, I got to take you to a science lab.
Well, some would say to me, well, your picture's not concrete evidence. No, it's not concrete, but you know what? It's taken from an airplane. It's pretty concrete that's very clear, and it passed all scrutiny. At least when I talked to Friedman, when he got it back and he could do whatever test he did with it, it was a real object in the picture. And you could kind of gauge maybe the height by the landscape around, and it's a good daytime sighting. You look at the trajectories of things, the data. So that's what I looked at, because I thought, I even went as far as to blow up the picture on an old copier back back then. I was like, wow, that looks something. Ooh. And that was a very smooth white disc craft. I mean, it was an off-white, kind of an ivory color. And it was, I think it was an old 110 film that was used, the old Kodak 110, where it had that soft kind of matte look finish to it. Remember that style of photos that was going on in the 70s there?
Mm-hmm.
It was that type of picture.
So do you still have those copies of those pictures that you had made, or did you just get rid of them because you didn't really need them?
Well, no, those were just, I was, that was just something I did one day messing around in the college library, before I even, those things are long gone, it's been over 20 years. It's about 20 years now, yeah. But, yeah, Dr. Friedman, you want the pictures? Let's call Friedman. No, but I'm serious. He still has them. And I know that he retired, and I'd like, he said it himself, we're in a race against the Grim Reaper, against the Undertaker. And we really are, So when it comes to this sort of subject matter,
So when you say that, you're basically saying, because life is short, or what exactly does that mean? A race with the Grim Reaper?
Well, as a researcher, anybody who researches, you're in a race with the Undertaker, meaning the people who are blowing the whistles about whatever government story there is, whether it be new information on. I hate to call new. Let's say any information on JFK, or I think didn't they just get some 4,000 new documents crowdfunded and released from the MK Ultra documents still? In how many years? It's over 40 years after they were first declassified in I think 1977. So things are still coming out. Then you have that story where families in Canada are suing the Canadian government for the MK Ultra and what Dr. Ewan Cameron did. And then if you go back into Jim Keith's research, he mentions Dr. Ewan Cameron and all this crazy mind control. He would induce his patients into sleep comas for up to 200 days just to see what would happen. Basically turning these people into vegetables. All in the name of science. They would pump amphetamines into one arm, and then they pump, downers, so to speak, into the other arm, and they'd see what would happen to people. I mean, this was some pretty sick stuff that these guys were doing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these terms nowadays are so loosely tossed around when people in the mainstream talk about, he's MK Ultra, he's Britney Spears shaved her head, she's under mind control. You know what? That's the fluff. That's the icing. That's walking to Disneyland. The secret corridors of Disneyland. Have you ever heard about that? Secret corridors under Disneyland?
Yes, I have. I can't remember what the club is called. It's some number club, the 88 Club, or something like that.
The Crazy 88. No. I'm just kidding. But if you want to stay into the paranormal realm for a little bit, I have a very interesting paranormal time slip experience. I don't like the term Mandela effect. I really don't. I despise it, actually. But let me tell you this first. So here it is. Back when internet radio first, for me I started in about 2006. And I was on the air back then. It was about sometime during the summer. And I had a habit back in those days of having my TV on mute but broadcasting. And, I'd read the closed caption or whatever. Well, while I was playing a song one day while I was on the air, I turned to the TV, and on the ticker it said, Keeper Sutherland dies in a jet skiing accident while on vacation in Louisiana. So I unmuted it and I said, "What?" So the gal announces, "Kiefer Sutherland dies in a jet skiing accident while on vacation. News when we return. More news when we return from the commercial break." And I sat there stunned, and I went, "No kidding." So I muted the TV, and the song had ended, and I get on the air, and I said, "Hey, I don't know if this is true." So I make the announcement on the air that Kiefer Sutherland dies. And it was on Entertainment Tonight. That was the show. So I said to the audience, which back in those days, you had to go grab your own audience. You literally, to have 500 listeners at a desktop computer back then was, wow. But so I had people helping me search for a news story about him dying, getting killed. Nobody could come up with anything. Nothing. So I said, "Well, I'll keep you updated," because they said that they're going to come back with the rest of the story. So the show goes on, and I unmute the TV. Well, wouldn't you know it, I had to sit there and watch that horrible show for the next hour. And nothing was ever more said about the death of Kiefer Sutherland, dying in that tragic way. And I said, "I know what I saw." And years later, I was relaying this story to my friend Chris. And Chris says, "I remember that." He says, "But I remember them announcing it on the Tonight Show." I said, "Really?" So that's about the only other person I could ever come across other than me that actually heard anything about the death of Kiefer Sutherland. And that was right around the summer of 2006. So that, I don't know if you'd call that a time slip or, a PSYOP operation. I have no idea.
Yeah, pretty trippy, and he's alive and well. He was just at a bar in Dolores, Colorado a couple weeks ago. Somebody took a picture with him, but yeah, it's crazy how that stuff happens.
Yeah, but I'm not one of these crazy guys who insists that he's dead. No, I'm just saying, hey, I saw, what is this saying here? Another one was, I think I'll get into this one because it's a little more detailed. And this took place the last weekend of April in 2011. Now, I wrote George Norrie and Richard C. Hoagland and Art Bell, but I'm just going to read you the general the email I wrote to these guys about my experience.
Okay.
Because it'd be just more simpler that way if I just try to explain it. So quoting the email, it says, "Richard, I've heard you on Coast to Coast since the mid-'90s when Art hosted the show. Last Saturday evening, Coast to Coast ran the usual weekend show Somewhere in Time with Art Bell. The show was from October 18th, 2001, and you were speaking on Mars information. During one particular segment, you stated that you were asked to speak at NASA about the information you had, but was, in so many words, censored. I can't recall the exact details. However, you did state that you tweeted all about it on Twitter. There's one problem with this, Mr. Hoagland. Twitter did not come into existence until July of 2006. So pray tell me how you could have sent a tweet on October of 2001 when Twitter didn't exist. I wasn't the only one who heard this. My girlfriend was in the car with me as we listened to the rebroadcast. As soon as you mentioned you were on Twitter, I turned to her and said, I heard that right, didn't I? You heard that right. You did say Twitter. She replied, yes, you did say Twitter. Well, impossible, I said. How could Hoagland tweet when Twitter didn't exist? What is this? What's going on? Well, I ended up searching YouTube, and like I said, ended up searching Wikipedia, and Wikipedia said that Twitter didn't come out until July of 2006. More importantly, I said to my girlfriend at the time, if Twitter existed in 2001, people would have been tweeting about 9/11. That had just happened a month prior to that. So he wrote me back, and his response was actually kind of quippy. He says, Jason, if you have shifted, then that version of my tape will not exist in this timeline, but you have to check. Good luck, Richard. So that was interesting. How can you hear about the existence of something on a rebroadcast in the future? That didn't come out until 5 years later.
Weird.
And that was the thing, because it wasn't where we just misheard one word. He kept talking about it. That is why the conversation with my girlfriend at the time in the car was, it was like a 5-minute conversation. And this was at 1 a.m, and I remember we were helping my friend renovate an old farmhouse from the 1700s. So we're driving back in this cornfield at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we have this weird thing. He's talking about Twitter, and we are literally arguing in the car. And I said, look, it's a rebroadcast. I said, don't you know what a rebroadcast means? I said, this is 2011. I said, this broadcast is in 2001, 10 years ago. She didn't believe it till the announcer came back on and restated that the show was a rebroadcast. Then she's like, okay, that's weird. I said, I told you. So even when somebody was there listening to it, she didn't believe it until the announcer came on again stating, hey, this is a rebroadcast. Then here again is the plausible explanation. Somebody messing with the old archives and splicing in stuff to see who pays attention. I mean, would really somebody go that far to be that sick? Is somebody that bored somewhere? Or is it a real true phenomenon?
Yeah, like why would someone go through the energy and time to do something like that?
They went through the energy and time for the Roswell autopsy hoax in the mid-'90s.
Yeah.
Remember that? Come on, that everybody thought that was real for about a minute and a half. And,
Yeah.
I mean, they had people from Hollywood and some of these youngins don't remember that. They were either in diapers or weren't even born yet. Okay, that sightings TV show. Remember that? They had a big thing about it.
Yeah.
So, and when people use it now as proof, I have to laugh. I said, do they know where this footage comes from? And I like talking to Friedman about that. We talked a little bit about that in our interview about 20 years ago, the autopsy footage. So he was pretty nice, but like I said, the keeping of the photos was rather unexpected. What are you going to do?
Yeah, but how do you get those back? It'd be funny if you saw them
asking.
In some sort of show or something he would put together someday and be like, that's the photos I'm talking about. Send them back.
Well, yeah. See, he probably wouldn't know what they are now. It's been too long. Secondly, he's on the other side of the country. How plausible it is for me to fly. Really, I mean, in all retrospect, they're probably gone. I'll be honest, which is a loss to the community, I think. But, oh well, what are you going to do? There's not much you can do. But it's stumbling upon, things like time slips and, the Keeper Sutherland thing, and then the Art Bell Twitter saying, you have, another instance to where it was, again, in April of 16, I was in line in the drive-thru listening to AM radio, and it was a Sunday night, and a law show, I'll never forget, I got a pretty good memory, a law show was just about to come on. The announcer is introducing the law show, and he says, before we begin, I would like to start out by letting everybody know that Willie Nelson just passed away. And he starts reading this eulogy, and he starts going through a brief synopsis of his career, and he's, playing his music in the background. And I said, what, Willie Nelson's dead? He's dead? What? So I get on the phone again to my same girlfriend that witnessed, the Twitter thing. And I said, the announcer on AM radio just said Willie Nelson died. Look it up. And she couldn't find anything. Turns out Willie Nelson didn't die. Called the radio station. They denied everything. Well, we didn't make that announcement. Well, you know very well that especially a celebrity's death has to go through so many channels. The AP, the UP, whatever news wire that they use. It's not a simple mistake, especially when you're announcing the death of somebody, like Willie Nelson. So when you have those kinds of things coming through on your airways, and then the person denying they said them, who, other than happening to catch it, on video at that moment, all you have is the word, and then the word of the witness, if there are any.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
that's what I call, a lot of that happened in Maryland, so that's what I call weird Maryland. One of the
Go ahead.
well, you talk about one of the weird ghostly things in Maryland. There's a Civil War site. I don't know which one it is. It's somewhere in southern Maryland. Well, when I first moved there, my ex took me down to a Civil War memorial site, and it was I think it was a mass grave, or supposed to be, and it had the names of all the Civil War Confederate soldiers that fought on this particular land, and it had the battle and everything. And this is going to sound funny, but it's actually... And this was on video, actually, and I wish I had it. But we're filming, and she's telling me all about the surrounding area and whatever. So we get in the car, and as she starts the car, she screams. And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Something bit me." I said, "What do you think something bit you?" She goes, "Something bit me on my chest. It hurts real bad." And she's going on and on about it. And I'm like, "Just start the car." She's like, "I'm serious." She started kind of to cry a little bit. And she looks down, and she opens up her shirt. She's wearing a flannel shirt. She unbuttons it, and she looks down, and she freaks out. And she goes, "Look." She opens up her shirt, and there's teeth marks on the top of her breast, bottom and top, like 4 teeth marks on the top, 4 on the bottom. Like you could see like somebody sank their teeth right there. And I went, "Whoa!" And we have it on. Well, she probably still has it somewhere. Have it on video. I mean, it was a really red, like fresh bite mark right there.
Wow.
And I said, "You got bit by a ghost, and we got it on video." And she's like, "Shut up." I said, I said, I knew moving here was a bad idea. That was one of my first weird Maryland experiences. She getting bit by a ghost. But those stories I really don't. I told to a few people, but how many stories do you hear of those? I got bit by a ghost. Yeah, okay. Give me some of that. What you're smoking too. So,
yeah.
but like I said, I would, me back in the day, I would have put it on YouTube. I actually made that mistake one time. Actually did something, I don't know what, a Ouija board session that we were doing. She wanted to do a Ouija board session.
Oh, man.
So we did it, and we did it. We put it on YouTube, and she got mad at me. "Get that off of YouTube. What are you doing?" I said, "People love this stuff. What do you, But she wouldn't have it. So I learned my lesson. But her place was haunted, living in Maryland. She had some sort of entity in that house. And that entity was a dark black mass. And the only reason I say that is, people talk about the sleep paralysis and being held down by the hag. Well, I was held down by this big black mass, and I could only move my eyes. I mean, and that was it. I couldn't move my body. I couldn't nothing. I mean, I was conscious and awake. So these types of things would happen. I don't think it helped that her mother committed suicide in the home years prior, but she always thought that her mother haunted the house.
Yeah,
so
it's very possible.
I don't know. Then again, here in 2011, I went and I took another job working for a removal company who removed, bodies, the deceased. And speaking of strange goings-on, I think one of the, I'll say this is the funny one, kind of spooky, is you're not issued a, like when we worked at the medical examiner, we had the bells and whistles, the insignia, people knew who we were. But working for private outfits is a lot different. So they gave me a minivan with the gurney.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, and I have to laugh. And here's some humorous parts about the business. and about what goes on. And some people might be able to relate, but one time I had picked up a fella and was driving on the freeway, had it on cruise control, and the dome light in the minivan started going on and off by itself. The electric locks started going up and down by themselves. The door ajar light kept going on and off. I mean, everything. And I thought the car was malfunctioning, like, circuits were shorting out or something. It lasted so long. I got onto the phone to my boss, and I said, I think something's going on with the car, man. He said, why? I said, well, the electric locks are going up and down by themselves right now. I said, the dome light's flashing on and off by itself. The door jar light on the dash is dinging, okay? I said, the radio is turning stations by itself. And he says, do you have a body in the car? And I said, yeah. He goes, it's probably one of him. I said, what do you mean it's probably him? He says, well, you're not the first to call about this. That's happened, weird things in that van. I said, I'm driving a haunted minivan, and he started laughing at me.
And on that note, Jason, we got to go to our first break.
Oh, wow,
we'll be right
an hour
back.
already.
Yeah, right back after these messages. You guys don't go anywhere.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
There's news, and there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
Tonight's show and topic of discussion do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Spaced Out Radio, SOR Media, or its hosts. Listener discretion is advised. Here comes the second hour of Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. And you can follow Tessa on Twitter at Tessa TNT. Now, back to the show.
Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with us tonight. Tonight we have Jason Mathis, and he's telling us about all of his experiences through life as far as paranormal and beyond. Welcome back, Jason. So glad to have you.
Hello.
Hello. So when we went to break, you were talking about that van that you had gotten from work. I don't think if we quite finished up on that.
Yeah, well, it was a Chrysler minivan, because I know some of those minivans we were talking about go haywire. You know, they're the electrical system. You know. But I do have, well, I didn't know what they were at the time, orbs on video from a outing I did at a graveyard. A friend of mine had gotten killed back in the 90s, so I got all these orbs on video. I didn't come to find out later that's what they were. But jumping, I don't know, my mind's going everywhere tonight because we were talking about a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah. Well, that experience you were just talking about with your van reminded me of the day my Uncle Daddy passed away, and I call him that because he basically raised me and my little brother, him and my Aunt Sandy, who actually adopted me in May, down in Phoenix. But we went down and had to pick up his belongings. First we went and saw him, and we discovered a lot of his stuff was thrown in the trash, a lot of things that were sentimental to him, and a lot of his important things were missing, including his journal. But I was like, we need to go to his house right now. And my mom's like, no, I want to find out what the doctor has to say. And I was like, we need to go as soon as possible. So try to get through this quick and we need to go. And she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, I think she's over there grabbing his stuff. And I'm referring to his ex-wife, because she was a gold digger. And she's like, no, she's at work. That's why she's not answering her phone and yada yada. And I'm like, no, she's not. She's at Uncle Bill's house. And so we get over there, and lo and behold, her and her new husband are over there loading up all his stuff, even packing up the car that was supposed to go to my sister Amanda. And a fight ensued, like a physical fight between my mom and the husband, and Deborah's running around like a chicken with her head cut off. And during this time, I'm grabbing his belongings out of her car because they don't belong to her, and putting them in my mom's car, locked it up. But I had to drive the car, because my uncle's car, from there, because my sister was just a total wreck, and my mom was driving that car. And as I'm driving this car, the horn just starts honking, honk, 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 honk. And I'm like, it just cracked me up, because I knew it was my uncle, and this car had never had this defect before. So it just made me smile, because I knew he was there, and it was kind of like his last hurrah. But it's funny how spirits and ghosts or whatnot can achieve such things. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, or when your intuition kicks in of certain, well, how can I explain it? I'll put it this way. When I was in college, I took a directing class, and part of directing class was to direct certain scenes from plays, and they were 3-man teams. Well, I used to take my Hi-8 video camera all the time with me to class, and I would videotape everybody doing their scenes, and because people would want copies. And back in those days, people didn't tote around video cameras like now everybody has one. But back then, it just really wasn't a thing. So I would rehearse our little scene. Now, my friend Jeff at the time was doing the scene from a play called The Sandbox, and my friend Jeff was playing an old lady. He was going to dress in drag and do the old lady scene. My character was the Grim Reaper. And so we were rehearsing this scene, and I'm supposed to stand behind Kurt while he's doing the old lady monologue, and I'm supposed to be talking. Basically, I'm waiting to take him up. I'm the Grim Reaper. He's dying. The old lady's dying. Well, after several weeks of rehearsing this scene, I was getting not a very good feeling, and other things were going on in the class that just weren't working out. Other kids' projects, they couldn't find people to work with. Things weren't meshing. People weren't showing up for class. Just nothing was working, just for whatever reason for this particular assignment. So I went to Jeff and I said, maybe we shouldn't just do the scene. Maybe we should just do something totally different. And so we're like, what? I said, I don't know. I said, everybody's doing Shakespeare and the boring crap. I said, let's do something from, some action. I don't know what I said. Well, it turned out December 5th, I think it was like a Friday. This was in 98. Was partying that night, and we had our midterm due on the 6th on Saturday. We had to go act it out in front of the teacher, the directing teacher. Well, I didn't go. I skipped class. So I called Jeff to direct. Well, the truth be told, I was out all night. I was in college. So I called Jeff on Sunday and apologized for not showing up, and I ruined his scene. I didn't show up. He says, no, actually, I didn't do my scene. Nobody did their scene. I said, what? He said, yeah, we showed up on Saturday, but come to find out, Kurt got killed Friday night in a car wreck. I said, are you kidding me? Yeah, it was raining that night, and his brother was driving, and the car hit another car, and Kurt got thrown from the vehicle out the window. And his brother only sustained a broken leg. So Kurt was 22, and he got killed. So that's why nobody did their directing scene for that day was Kurt's death. And everybody got to slide on their midterm for directing class. So my premonition was really eerie, because then after that I had people coming up to me at the funeral saying, "You said that he was going to die. How did you know he was going to die?" I said, "I didn't know he was going to die." "Well, how come you were videotaping the class like crazy for the last 6 weeks?" I'm like, "That's what I do. I'm a film guy. I videotape things. I have this crazy idea called reality TV." No, just kidding. But but that was my thing. Because I was making student films, uploading video on the internet. Back then it was a painstaking effort. You had to render it, and you had to do all sorts of. It wasn't this instant digital like it is now. So then I actually had compiled a tape of everything that Kurt had done in class, and I gave it to his family. But for a long time, it spoofed the class. "How did you know he was going to die?" I'm like, "I didn't know. I just had a feeling that we shouldn't be doing that scene." I said, "There's a difference. If I knew, then, no one would still believe me. So, what are you going to do?"
Yeah, you can, if you do get something like that, you can share it, but like you said, how do you know they're going to believe you? But I guess just letting it be known is a good idea.
Well, then you meet other people, because you're so, me being so experienced with the death and the aftermath, or looking at, or reading autopsy reports of symptoms. Like one time I was working one night at this computer place where they built computer motherboards, and one of the guys had called the ambulance. It was about 3 a.m, and I had walked into the office where he was and where the paramedics were, and they were giving him an EKG, and he was not looking good. And I said, "Man, you've had a heart attack." I said, "You need to go get a 12-lead EKG." I said, I know I got heart issues. I said, "You've had a heart attack." "Oh no, I feel fine now." Well, I said, "If you don't go, you're gonna die." "Oh no, don't. No, I'm fine. I can continue to work." I'm like, "No, you're not working. You're going home." Well, he ended up going home about an hour later. Well, later on that day, after work, so I didn't find this out until 2 days later when I came into work. Turns out that he was moving, and he sat down on the couch to take a rest, and he never woke up. And he was only 35. He died.
Wow.
Because he never followed up after having that old heart attack there at work. And the paramedics even told him he probably had a heart attack. Because it's just amazing to me the denial some people will go through. I'll tell you somebody. Then there are other people who have faced death literally. Like when we were talking about, you and I were talking about my friend Dan. He has died 6 times. 4 times he's in the last year. He has an enlarged heart. It turns out then he had one of the valves were messed up. He knows the technical terms better than I do, but basically he just got a heart valve replaced. And when the way he was explaining it to me, when you're on the operating table, they have to stop your heart when they put the new valve in, then restart it. Well, only his heart would not restart. And they tried to resuscitate him for 50 minutes. Now that's long. They usually get up after 7 or 8 or even 10. 14's long. But 50 minutes. And I said, well, they must have been feeding the oxygen, obviously, because you're not brain damaged. Now, he is forgetful more. I've noticed, I think he has sustained some kind of memory loss because of it. But other than that, to code for 50 minutes is a very long time. And he said that, I think the last thing to go when you die is your hearing. He says, because I can still hear everything going on around me. The medical terms and the nurses team and the doctors. And then on one occasion, when he died, he said that he was out of his body. And he says, I saw the light on one side of the room. He goes, and then on the other side, my hospital room door was open, and then I heard the nurses calling to me from the darkness. And I said, I don't want to die. He goes, the next thing I know, I was back in my body. So, but when you have somebody who the first time he died, he was hit on in a head-on collision coming home from work. When he came to in the hospital and they asked him, do you know what happened? He said, yeah, it was hit by a flying saucer. But on a serious, that's what he really said. But on a serious note, they expected him to die. They had all his stuff in the evidence bag ready to go. They were just waiting to sign the death certificate, basically, and he came back. And that's when was his first out-of-body experience. And that was around November of Thanksgiving of 2006. And then more recently, the issue with his heart, of him dying on the table. So when you have somebody who's died so many times, and I say that that's evidence that there's a God or a higher being. I say, he's keeping you alive. He says, but for what? Well, we don't know. But so when you have stories like that of out-of-body experiences, there must be something to it.
Yeah, so did he really explain those, or did he just say that he could hear their voices from the darkness, or what exactly did he say happened with his experience?
That's what he said to me. You know, he didn't say, well, it was all black and dark. As far as I know, that's probably what it was. But he said, I heard people around me. He says, I didn't see a light. I didn't see the other side. That's this time around. You know, I didn't go to the light. You know, I didn't, Aunt May didn't meet me out there. You know, this is what he said, something to that effect. Because you hear people of family members greeting you when you die and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What he said, and we were discussing, is I find that there's a lot of people out there trying to find evidence of the afterlife. They're too busy doing that, and they're not living, this life. So you have to be careful when you're researching, or when you have these sorts of things, not to get too involved in that. Because, back 20 years ago, when you got these people involved in witchcraft and the like, or whatever you want to call it, that can suck you in. If you're not careful. I watched them suck those two people in, I knew. And
well, you were talking about premonitions and such, and going back to, my Uncle Bill dying, the very next day, I got up early, which is weird enough for me. I sleep in as late as I can, because I do stay up way late. But I just had this nagging feeling, there's something I need to find, And so I went downstairs and I started going through his bag. Then my little brother Aaron came down, and he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, there's something in here I need to find. And I found little things like his social security check and different stuff like that, but that wasn't it. And then I pulled out his scriptures and I opened it up, and second page in, he had written the last letter he ever wrote, and he was saying, I'm scared, she's trying to kill me, I've told her that fentanyl is going to lower my oxygen intake, and my uncle was a nurse all of his life, so he knew everything about all these meds. But she keeps giving me the fentanyl. My oxygen level is now at this level, and it's decreasing. So instead of him, being at peace with his death because he had pulmonary fibrosis and whatnot, they basically took that peace away from him by killing him quickly with dose after dose after dose of fentanyl until he overdosed. And it was, he wasn't jumping through the hoops they wanted him to, and so they weren't feeding him through a tube or anything. He couldn't have solid foods because he had to wear this face mask, and, we were all there the night that he died. It was actually the night before, because it was about 4 or 4:20 in the morning when he passed, but, they were basically starving him to death. They weren't doing as he requested, and he wasn't jumping through the hoops that they wanted him to, and they wanted to send him to hospice and all this other stuff, but he knew, he wouldn't get the care that he needed there. And so they basically just OD'd him. And my sister went on the warpath with this whole legal fight with them and doing all her homework and all the work on her own. And had she gone after the doctor for this, she would have won. But she went after the nurse who was only following the doctor's orders. But yeah, it's pretty, the medical field is pretty scary.
Yeah. One more short thing, and then we'll go into the other subject. But
okay,
we had a friend. We being me and my ex-girlfriend had a friend. She had a family friend who ended up with, I think, testicular cancer, I believe, or colon cancer. One of the two, but it was bad. And it was so bad that it landed them in hospice. And this was in the summer of, spring of 2013. And he elected to, he had no family except for his brother. And his brother has a very rare skin disease. He can't go out in the sun. He has to cover up his whole body. The sun rays can't hit his body. So basically, he lives as a recluse. Brother never comes out of the house. Lives far away from his brother. And so, the fellow I'm talking about, his name is Mark. So Mark gets put in hospice, and he's only 50 or so, I think. And when you watch somebody who's in denial about their own death, and talking like, well, when we went and picked him up at the hospice center, he was allowed to leave and come back because he was well enough to get around. The thing was, he could have died at any moment, pretty much, or something to that effect. It was coming quick. And we went back to his house, and I remember he had his last party, his last hurrah. He sat on his couch. He got his beer out. He looked at all his collection of his books, everything. He got his medical marijuana out, and he had a big old party up there. And he talked. He says, and he tells me, he says, I want you and your family to be able to grow up here. He goes, because I'm coming back. I said, well, what do you mean you're coming back? Well, this is only for a little while, man. I'm getting better. I said, and I don't think he was on any pain pills at that point because he wasn't in pain. I think he was in hospice 2.5 months and then he died. But the way that he dealt with it was he showed us an article that he was presented in the local paper. And he was so happy that he was treated like a king. I could get lobster dinner if I want. I could get anything I want. They'll make me. He's telling me this, and he's telling my girlfriend this at the time. And I thought, on one hand, how sad is it that we live in a society that here it is, a dying man only feels like a king in his last days, that he can get anything he wants. I mean, that's just one perspective, but he was a working man, a regular, American guy. Mm-hmm. And it just makes you think. But he would talk about, and I would ask him, "What do you mean when you come back?" And I said, like, when you, and I'd say, and he'd say, pass away, and I'd say, yeah. He goes, well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm always, so I don't know if that was his way of saying I'm going to try to haunt the place.
Yeah.
or what, but but when you're that close to somebody who's just on their way out, and then you have the other camp willing to try to communicate with these people. Ugh. It's very dark, murky waters.
Yeah. Well, it's always been a question in people's minds from the beginning of time, like what is after this? Where do we go, and what happens to us? And I think when you're bestowed certain gifts or you have certain gifts, it's your job to build upon it and help people in any way you can with it. And so I don't really fear it. But yeah, my dad was also the same way, as far as my mom was very spiritually inclined and could talk to the dead, and she'd go to the cemetery and smoke a joint and talk to them and just hang out, like going to visit her friends or whatever. And My dad was always against it. And even after she passed, and me talking about my gifts with him, he's like, that's probably what got your mom killed, and yada yada. And I'm like, Dad, I truly believe that I was given this gift for a reason, and I don't think I'm doing anything wrong, and I'm going to help whoever I can with it. So it is a fine line of what to do and what not to do. There are a lot of things I don't recommend that other people are comfortable with, such as Ouija boards and other stuff like that. But not for me. Not me, Coach.
No. No, but then you have, then the other spectrum of it, you have these ghostly goings-ons, and then, as I mentioned earlier, you have Grandpa showing me photos of UFOs, and that was always something interesting. But after the Friedman thing, and talking to him over the years, about when the pictures were or are, excuse me, I kind of just, I guess I took it easy from the UFO thing, only because the internet by that time, this is around 2008, 2009, the internet was, coming along, and it's internet radio, and Art Bell was still, I think, on the air in some fashion. I don't remember, because there's a lot of paranormal talk shows, a lot of Art Bell spring-offs, and even when we get into Mae Brussels later on, talking about her, one of the original researchers of the John F. Kennedy assassination, and covering every major news story from, the 60s until her death in 1988. You have guys like authors and researchers like Jim Marrs, who wrote, I think, Rise of the Fourth Reich. Well, Mae Brussels, that's what Mae Brussels coined it back in, the 70s, was the Fourth Reich, to talk about what was going on, or whatever the news story was of the day. And she got information from the newspapers, from declassified documents, from books, and you talk about doing research the old-fashioned way. Now it's a click away. Back then, you really had to do your legwork. So, did you fall asleep at Tessa? Yeah.
No.
It's that monotone voice.
Hello. Are you there? Hello. Ferris Bueller.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I bored the audience. Did I get 6 stars for that? No. But
6 stars. Yeah, put us to sleep early for a Sunday. That way we can wake up well and recuperated and everything in the morning. No, I'm just kidding. Well, no, it's not boring at all.
No, the UFO thing, you have to be very careful, because I came upon this story through a friend of mine, my old friend Gino, God rest his soul. He died back in 2015, but he was an author, and he wrote a lot of technical books and a few regular books. He wrote a book called The New Father's Panic Book, but he was an established author. Well, he got me in touch with a guy named Chris, and Dave interviewed me about Chris a little less than a year ago, and I'll touch a little bit on Chris and his experience. He was retired United States Air Force, and he was stationed at Shemya Air Force Base in Alaska. Yeah. Okay, give me a minute. All right. My daughter.
No worries.
Maybe right there. That's all right. So anyways, Gino gets me in touch with Chris. He says, well, Chris has an experience seeing these discs at the airbase. I said, oh, really? Well, all we have is stories, but, that's all most of this stuff is, because I know a lot of people out there, there's no evidence. Well, if you look it up, a lot of these people exist. Like General Boswell was there at the time. He was general of the Alaskan Air Command, and Chris ended up, being debriefed by him after Chris told him what happened. But basically, Gino gets me in touch with Chris, and after talking to him over several emails and telephone calls, he was the very first operational crew of the Cobra Dane radar systems back in 1977. And basically, they're not necessarily spying on the Russians, but be able to detect Russian missiles and anything in outer space. Somewhere in my notes I have the exact what the Cobra Dane could track a baseball down to, how many feet or whatever. But either way, he was on the first operational crew of that, and he said one of his first experiences was he was out gathering wood for a project. He said there was a lot of downtime out there on the island, and he saw an owl land on a pallet of wood. He got dizzy and he passed out. Next thing you know, he wakes up and okay, I'm sorry. Well, I'll get you something to drink. Hold on. So anyways, he wakes up in an airplane hangar with, my friend Dan. He says, "Don't talk about baritone." I'm talking about baritone. Yes, and he's probably throwing his wine right now at the radio. But anyway, Chris tells me I wake up in the hangar, and there's these two aliens looking over me, and I said, for lack of a better term, "Who are you? Who are you guys?" He says, "I was in shock." He says, "At first I thought it was." Hold on, I'm on the radio. He says, "At first I thought it was, dreaming." He said, "But I realized I'm really awake." And he says, one of them said to me, "Well, we saved your life. We were coming in for a landing, and you almost got basically, electrocuted or evaporated from the electromagnetic discharge of the UFO that was landing." So I said, "Well, what did you think of that?" He says, "I didn't know what to think." He said, "I have these two things looking at me." He says, "And they stink." He says, "They stink like rotted meat." And I said, "Well," I said, "Did you ask them where they came from? What do you say?" And he says, "Well, I was in shock." I said, "Well, obviously." He said, "Well, number one, they're speaking English." He said, "And number two, when I asked them who they were, they said, well, we're airmen like you, and we have, our job, like our assignments, like you. And that's why we picked you up, is because we didn't want anything to happen and, have to write a report or anybody to answer to, if something happened to you." And he says, "And besides, with your security clearance, and anything that goes on, nobody's going to believe you anyway." One of those things. So as he talks to this alien, he described him as a very pale, like a albino white person who never gets into the sun. Their heads were kind of scaly, kind of like a lizard, but he said that their whole body, their torso and their legs were smooth, and you could actually, their skin was translucent. You could actually see their veins in their arms and their legs and their chest and things like that. And he said that they wore, one of them popped out like a sunglass contact lens out of their eyes, as he was talking to this one, asking him, "What's going on? Who are you? What are you doing here? You're not human." This, kind of absorbing what's going on, because this isn't the normal case of abduction, so to speak. We always hear about these cases of aliens, probing and prodding and something nasty, or the nice kind, to come to save us, or some weird fashion, or some story like that. This is on a military base, in the mid-'70s. And Melody, I'm on the air. So anyways, I'm sorry. Yeah. So anyways, no, she's, that's fine. She's tired because it's late. I understand. But, it's still early here. But anyway, he's telling me about this interaction with this being. And I said, "Well, what happened after that?" He says, "Well, after that, I went back to, walking back to my truck." I said, "Okay, well, where'd they go?" He says, "I don't know. I left the hangar." He says, so I was walking back to my truck, he says, and a security police truck pulled up next to me, and he asked me who I was, and I stated, my name and rank, and he says, man, you've been missing for 3 days. And he said, what?
Jeez.
He says, get in your truck and follow me back to the tactical operations room. So he says, I get back there to the TOR, and I informed the base commander of what I did that day and what happened. And then he immediately took me up to the commanding officer's office. And then from there, he was taken to see the commanding officer, I think in Boswell. Or I have it written down over here next to me. I'm just kind of going by memory right now. But basically, General Boswell said, okay, tell me what happened, from the very beginning. So he crowds to the day, looking for wood, and, I'm doing this project, run into this, being, we talk, we chat. Well, Boswell tells him, well, it hasn't been a day, it's been 3 days. And you were witness going in one of these crafts and taking off and leaving the island, and you don't recollect any of that. And he said, no. And he said during the questioning or his words interrogation, there was another guy there who he guessed it was what later we would assume to be a man in black, a guy dressed in a very nice suit, kind of a crew cut, very trim nails, he said his tie was had some sort of design on it that he was convinced had something to do with putting him in a trance. He said there's something to do with he said I've never seen a tie like it. He kept going on and on about it, which I thought that was kind of funny. But basically he was threatened not to say anything about what he saw, and was released. But that wasn't his only run-in with seeing these discs and seeing these aliens, for lack of a better term. He's probably got 3 or 4 other different stories that he wrote me throughout the time, and his conversations with them. And they go into such strange and off-beaten subject matter. And I would say to him, did you really talk about that? I'll give you an example, like the ancient astronauts. Everybody likes to talk about ancient astronauts. Well, in his talking with this one particular alien, he says that we are the ancient astronauts, that man has built these machines over the last 7,000 to 9,000 years. And he says, the schematics are in the pyramids and over here, but, your archaeologists and your modern-day scientists hide it in plain sight, or they deny it. He says, we did talk about those sorts of things. And, and getting to know Chris and talking about this thing that happened to him, I'd joke or I'd ask, did you talk about Roswell? So he was a year there, like I said, and he said he talked to and ran into this particular alien, and he did give him a name. And the name is, he named him Baritone, which I think is funny. Now Dan's really hitting the roof. I have to make a joke. He said, don't talk. He says, don't talk about baritone. God, just keep it magnetic propulsion like Bob Lazar. Well, but it's true. As far as how the craft flew, that's what Chris said. He got a tour inside of the craft one time from a human pilot that flew these things. And it ran on a, negative and positive polarity, basically, and the craft was surrounded in a magnetic envelope. And that's what flew around was the magnetic envelope. The craft was actually sitting still inside, and that's what allows it to do all these fancy maneuvers that are supposed to be not being able to, have done. Unconventional flying maneuvers, I guess. So, and it really irritates me that they changed, the UFO to, these aerial phenomenons. I mean, they were getting more politically correct or what?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, that's a fine line too, people get so easily offended these days, but...
Well, life is about, life is about offense. If you don't, sorry, you don't want life if you can't handle being offended. Life wasn't for the individual, just for you, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, yeah, well, we all have to get together and to do the best we can. That I get, that I agree with, but don't be offended because I'm using the word freshman, not first-year student.
Yeah.
So, but talking with Chris and his experience, I can kind of see why some people would be turned off to it. Because if you get reading his, because I've told more in depth of his story and more conversations, that he's had with this alien being, and a lot of it's just so, to me, I don't want to say off the wall, but what's the popular term that people like to use, woo-woo, and I don't think it's any more far woo-woo than reading Communion or the Travis Walton thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it deserves just the same amount of respect and attention. I'm not a full-fledged, full-time researcher, and I don't have the ways and means like maybe a lot of people do to sink the money in to do the proper research. But as far as the research that I've done, all the names that he is giving me and the times have checked out. And moreover, I've collected other Shemya veteran stories of their experiences with UFOs and craft, from around the same time, some within months of Chris's sighting and his experience, within months to within years, stretching, from 77 forward and then from 77 backwards, all the way back to, 1948. So there is a history of activity on the island. It's nothing new. And, you could even trace it back even more. When people talk about Roswell, but did anybody ever, Dan and I were talking about this, when Admiral Byrd went down to Antarctica in 47 and did Operation High Jump and claimed that he was attacked by flying discs that could fly from pole to pole within a matter of, just a short time. He said that World War II wasn't over. He said that in a Chilean newspaper interview. He said Hitler has, discs on there. World War II's not over. We got to fortify. We got to, put defenses down in Antarctica. And the American government didn't like that Byrd said that. And they tried to hospitalize him. And of course, that didn't quite work out. But could Roswell incident? Could that have been a Nazi retaliation? I mean, that happened because I think Admiral Byrd went down there and sometime in late 46, early 47. He gives an interview in the Chilean press in, I think, not March of 47, but July of 47. Then within a week, you have the Roswell incident. I mean, that's cutting it close. You have Admiral Byrd talking about Nazis down there in Antarctica flying their saucers and him being attacked and his planes going down. They had enough armory down there. It wasn't just a scientific expedition like you read now. You read about it now. Oh, that was just a scientific expedition. No, you read some. I got some books. Got names of them somewhere. I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, but you go back and what he said, and you look at Roswell. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's pretty cutting it close.
Mm-hmm.
You got Admiral Byrd seeing disc down there in 1947 from March of 47 all the way. And he's being interviewed by the Chilean newspapers. It was either in March or July. I know that that's one question that I've never heard anybody ask. What if the Roswell thing was, in actuality, an attack by a super secret, Nazi flying craft.
Well, not only that, in Aztec, New Mexico, which is less than an hour from where I'm at currently, in 1948, there was another UFO crash.
I mean, what better way? If you're the American government, what would you rather have the public believe? In little green men? Or wait a minute, no, some of Hitler's boys are still attacking. World War II ain't over. Now it's been well after the war. If we're talking 47, 48, 2-3 years, America, people being acclimated again back into society, baby boomers, things are happening, cultural shifts, so to say that, something happened in World War II in some fashion was not over by Admiral Byrd's accounts. Well, that's a big news story. You bet your butt little green aliens exist now. I mean, I'm not saying that's what it is, but it cuts really close to that time if you read the information. And what I really like is they put out truth, what I like to call truth nuggets. In the September 1957 issue of National Geographic, they have a map of Antarctica, and I actually have it. And on the map of Antarctica, they have the bases where Byrd was, and also where the Germans were, where they staked their claims. And it also states on that map the secret base of where there's rolling hills and a desert oasis down there in Antarctica, free of ice-free oasis and rolling hills. So that doesn't sound like, the ice-frozen over tundra that we've been taught about. But it says it right there in the National right there. So you have to wonder, what are they, even now today, Antarctica is a big thing. Still big as far as top secretness. What's going on there?
Yeah, and people keep saying things that they've seen, way back in the past, as well as, currently, with the melt-off and everything else that's going on with that. And then I just watched a video earlier today that was showing something off the coast of Greece, but then it went on to show they look like radio waves, and they say it's coming from Antarctica, but you don't see the map above the United States or South America. It's really just that lower portion, but it shows these radio waves coming up from the north, and as soon as it hits this storm where this hurricane is forming, it just lights it up. And it's just weird. Like, there's so much stuff going on out there that, it's difficult to wrap our minds around it, because we're being fed all this BS all the time, and, the sleight of hand thing, watch this hand while I'm doing this with this hand. They're really good at, getting us off their path, and especially with so many sheeple out there that just eat up everything that they hear, you need to look it up for yourself, learn for yourself what is actually going on, and don't take someone else's word for it.
Yeah, what I like is, Mae Brussels, she talked about Adolf Hitler and the Nazi UFOs in the 1982 broadcast. I think it was in October of 82. She covered about 3 shows, 3 weeks, an hour long, about the whole Admiral Byrd thing, and really got into the meat of, as far as you could go for 3 hours, in her research and her story about that. Like I said, she even covered Bill Casey's book, We Never Went to the Moon. Even back in the 70s, they were saying, "Oh, did we go to the moon? Didn't we go? Was it faked? Was it not?" Stanley Kubrick, great showmanship. There's those sorts of conspiracies that have been floating around, and when they're still perpetuated now, this late, I'll say late, but we're pretty far into the 21st century. But these stories have been around for over 40 years now. Is there anything more? Is there anything new? There are some people out there who think that the moon is a hologram, for crying out loud. I mean, it's so utterly ridiculous now. What Kool-Aid are they giving the population? What's going on over here? So that's why I like Mae Brussels as a researcher, because she was like a springboard, because then you had Dave Emery, then you had Penn Jones, and then Mark Lane, and then you got to really see how the clique was formed in the research community very early on. And I think it was a guy by the name of Sprague who coined the term power control group, meaning only certain groups of people, and we've heard about it on this station before, only certain groups of people are allowed on the lecture circuit talking about this, that, or the other thing, whatever. But, this goes back, back to the 60s, and that's why I like I said, the research. You have every major news story that's covered every week, and the archive on it is pretty fantastic. It's very large. And just discussing her, we could do gobs of hours on Mae Brussels. I'm surprised somebody hasn't done a movie yet, at least. And I was in touch with her daughter Barbara, on and off for the last year, talking with her what happened to Mae's research after she passed, asking her about certain instances that Mae would talk about either in broadcasts or, I would say, articles that she would write about her family, things that happened to them that she felt were attacks by, certain governmental entities, FBI, CIA, what have you. She was even, very forthright about threats from Sandra Good from the Manson family, very forthright about inviting, the FBI to her home to look at the research that she did and telling these stories. So there's a lot of meat in these broadcasts, and a lot of the researchers now, you look at guys like, I hate to say his name, but Alex Jones would talk about a lot of this stuff before he, I'll say in the early days, before he went all emotional and kind of crazy, when he was more mellow, would cite stuff that Mae Brussels would talk about, or even, guys like William Cooper would. So there's always bits and pieces, and you can kind of pick up the trail from Mae Brussels after about 1988 as far as the researchers who kind of picked up where she left off, guys like John Judge who focused on, certain aspects of the Kennedy assassination or whatever. Lots of conspiratorial questions surrounding her death, and she was just a regular housewife, had 5 kids, and John Kennedy died, and she's like, whoa. Then when Lee Harvey Oswald died, she was, blown away. She's like, I think, something's going on in the country. What does this mean? Was our country taken over? Was there a coup? And then she started her research. And in the next hour, we can go more into that.
Yeah,
we got about 5 minutes left to go.
Yeah, we got some recordings and stuff for you guys to listen to, but Kevin in the chat room is asking, Tessa asked Jason if he has seen the documentaries Dark Legacy 1 and 2. They are about the JFK assassination and JFK Jr.'s death.
Not Dark Legacy. I saw one called, one out of many, called JFK 2 that was put out by, actually it was put out by Alex Jones's people about over a decade ago, I believe. And I say by his people because I found it, I think it was on his site or something like that. But either way, that goes into the Bush connection, with, the whole JFK thing. And recently I read, or at least for me, that JFK Jr. named his magazine George because he was subtly saying that's who whacked out my dad was George Bush. Who knows? I don't know too much about the death of JFK and his plane going down and things like that. I have a lot. Like I say, I do this more in my spare time and have fun. I have a book I'm slowly working on. Aren't we all, right? But
Yeah, it's so hard, especially you being a single dad. I mean, it's hard to find that time between work and raising the kids and sitting there having the quiet to be able to focus on reading this book.
Well, you know, I mean, had I stuck with the internet radio thing years ago, who knows what it would have came into. But see, back in those days, you didn't know, and these things, people kind of scoffed at internet radio back then. No, they didn't call it real radio because they didn't like the fact that anybody had a voice now. That was the beauty. Anybody could get on there and attract an audience. You want to talk about deregulation? Oh, wow, it's been deregulated, all right, so to speak. But
yeah, you know, you think back to the time when radio waves were so strapped down, and you had to have certain licenses and such to go onto the radio. Otherwise, it was pirate radio. Which I dig pirates, but I mean, the internet has just opened it up so much where everybody can state their mind and their beliefs and such, and it's very cool. It's a very cool time in the world, and it's very scary at the same time.
Yes, what would be alien to the new kids now, or the younger generation now, would be a movie like Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater. You know, the pirate radio. The internet, you know, the high school or the internet radio or the pirate radio station. You know, I mean, but that was a big revolutionary thing back then. And to hear him do the speech at the beginning, everything's done, everything's used up. I'm thinking if he only knew and what was coming, you know. But the speech still holds kind of, you know, relevance today in an odd way. But it also shows you a time in America that doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Well, on that note, we have to go to our second break, if you can believe that. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens, or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live, and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, we own the night.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month, where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Tonight's show and topic of discussion do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Spaced Out Radio, SOR Media, or its hosts. Listener discretion is advised. It's hour number 3 of Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. Follow Tessa on Twitter at TessaTNT. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now back to the Rocky Mountains. Here's Tessa.
Hey guys, welcome back, and thanks so much for hanging out with us this Sunday night. And just to let some of you know, because I've heard a couple people say, I thought it was Psychic Sunday, but the last 2 Sundays our psychics have dipped out for family loss, and one said that her angels told her not to do it, so we might have dodged a bullet on that one. But anyhow, Dan Shaw was gracious enough to be with us last week, and this weekend we have Jason Mathis with us, and he was going to talk a little bit on this last hour about Mae Brussels. And if you guys would like to call in with any of your questions or experiences, feel free to. It's 970-335-9596. That's 970-335-9596. Welcome back, Jason. Thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me talk about Mae Brussels.
Oh, no worries. So tell our audience a bit about her.
Well, Mae Brussels is not a name that we normally hear nowadays when we talk about research, and especially research into subjects like, John F. Kennedy, RFK, Martin Luther King, even Jim Jones, or the SLA, Ted Kennedy at Chappaquiddick. I know there was a movie that was just recently released about Ted Kennedy and Chappaquiddick, but she's researched that. So basically, think of every major news story since the John F. Kennedy assassination up until 1988, the year of her death. And then from 1971 until 1988, she had a radio show out of Carmel by the Sea, California, and then later out of, I think, KAZU out of Pacific Grove from 82 to 88. So she's the one that really heard about 11 others, and I'll get into them, their names here in a little bit, were really the pioneers for the research about the JFK assassination and what happened in Dallas. So while you had guys like Mark Lane and others focusing on the trajectories and the bullets, she was asking questions about Lee Harvey Oswald, who was he, who did he know, and things like that. And ironically, she shares a birthday with JFK. She was born on May 29th, 1922 in Beverly Hills, and her father was Edgar Magnin. He was a reform rabbi at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple. And then her paternal great-grandparents were Isaac Magnin and Marianne Magnin, and they were the founders of the I. Magnin upscale women's clothing store in San Francisco. So she came from a pretty well-to-do family. Now, she died on October 3rd, 1988, while in the midst of investigating the Presidio child molestation case. She was 66. So that investigation about the Presidio and things that happened, she uncovered satanic ritual abuse. Moreover, I think he was an intelligence officer, but Admiral Michael Aquino, she was investigating him. Well, he was fingered by a 3-year-old girl. She was out one day with her parents at the store, and she saw Aquino and his wife, and she started just absolutely freaking out and getting really scared, saying that's Mickey, and I forget what nickname she used for the lady. But basically, she told her parents about what Mickey and this lady had done to her in their house. And so that ended up, an investigation going into what happened with the Presidio. So a lot of people think in the research community that's what led her to maybe get off, so to speak. There is no conclusive proof of that, but a fast-acting cancer is what got her, I think. Some sources I've read, some people say that it was smeared on her driver's wheel of her car and it absorbed into her skin. She even went into, in a certain broadcast, I think, on CIA covert weapons about this particular cancer that could be spread. And she actually describes it in one of her broadcasts in the 70s. And then, to hear of the same symptoms that she later dies of that she describes is, rather kind of eerie. Is it predictive programming? Is it, she did tip the hats and rattle the cages of a lot of government agencies, that's for sure. And even by her own words, even on some of the broadcasts that you would hear, she says that, I had, people calling me for inside information because I would find out before them. And and a lot of it she would get through, like I said, freedom of information requests or declassified documents. A lot of it was she took in so many different newspapers from across the country. Like there would be an article, say, about a story in the San Francisco Chronicle, New York Times, and say the LA Times. and then let's say the same story out of a newspaper in New Orleans, but the newspaper in New Orleans adds maybe an extra paragraph or two, and that extra paragraph or two is what the meat of the whole article is about, the missing information. So this is how she would piece together certain things over the years. She kept a fastidious library. She bought the Warren Report in 1964. 8,000 copies were bought, in which she later found out that everybody who bought a copy of the Warren Report was put on a CIA watch list. Can you imagine that?
Yeah. Creepy.
Yeah. So she did a lot of research like that. Like I said, some of the subjects, John F. Kennedy, Watergate even, the Zodiac Killer, Gemstone Files. She did one show about the swine flu in the 70s. And did you know that the swine flu, it was a vaccine made up for something that didn't exist?
Mm-hmm.
And now we have the swine flu. So there are these little nuggets of information, and she names her sources in these shows and in these broadcasts. And I've gone up and looked up stuff, and some of it, can be found. Others was a little harder to trace, depending on what story you're looking at. But she really turned the tide, helped turn the tide for this sort of research, I think. She taught a class in conspiracy and the first accredited college course in conspiracy theories at, I think, Monterey College, Community College, I think it was, in the mid-'70s. Was guest on other radio shows, spoke at women's clubs, things like that. So, is there anything in particular you'd like to know about? Anything that she? I don't know. We're kind of free-flowing it here.
Well, if you want, we can play these clips that we have, and then we can progress from there. Or how do you think we should go from here?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll do these clips because clips are always fun to hear, and this one's not too long. It's about 1 minute and 10 seconds. This first one is I label it Mae Barbara. Here she talks about, and I think it's the October 28th, 1978 broadcast of hers. World Watchers is what her show ultimately became known as. In the beginning, it was Dialogue Assassination, and then Dialogue Conspiracy, and then sometime in 1978, she changed it to World Watchers. Well, she documented an hours-long show about all the things that happened to her family, what she felt were attempts on either her life, or even various death threats that she would receive, death letters or phone calls or whatever. Well, this clip, she's talking about her daughter Barbara and how she was, somebody tried to lure her out of the house in the middle of the night, and she describes her home, I think, in this clip. But let's play it. It's called Mae Barbara. She describes being lured out of the house and how her was called by the cops and that her daughter was arrested, and it turned out not to be true.
All right, we're going to the clips.
And he said I could, and I didn't go to San Francisco because I just didn't want to be on the road.
Well, I'd be able to hear that.
I got a call one night from the police department in Carmel impersonating the police department. It wasn't from them at all, saying my daughter was there, and this was 10 o'clock at night, that she'd been picked up on the beach and was smoking marijuana. And Barbara doesn't have drugs or marijuana, and she was over 21, so I don't know why I'd have to release her anyway, but I said I'd come down there, and then, again, a fluke, a telephone show, I think it was in St. Paul, somewhere in the east. I had a telephone conference call, and I called the police department to say that I'd be just a half hour late, that she shouldn't expect me for a half hour or an hour, and they said she wasn't even there, and we checked the university, and she was in her night classes. So again, I'd be coming down this dark hill on a lonely road, down Carmel Valley Road, and it was a fluke, so that I had the feeling that something like this could come on the way home from KGO, and I did that conference call, so that the wheels coming off the car and the rattlesnake story breaking, the snake is used as a weapon, and then the death threat, I decided to play it safe and stay home. My oldest son, Marvin, was given acid by Carolyn Gilman. Carolyn and Peter have worked with the intelligence community. This was in '67 while I was in New Orleans. My other son, David, had dinner with an instructor who teaches. He's from Brazil at the DLI language school. We trusted him and knew him a long time. His name is Lee. And the night after David had dinner, 20 minutes later, he sort of conked out and was hazy and drove home, and on the way home had a car crash and was almost killed. He was all right. He was thrown out of the car, but it could have been a really serious incident. And he never called Lee again. Subconsciously, he must have associated the dinner or something with the accident, because the man had been a driver. He'd come up from Brazil and was going to UCLA and worked for my first husband, and the boys went to a private school. And he moved into the house and was driving the boys around. And then when we moved up here, he had come up here and was teaching language at the Defense Language School in the department. He's from Brazil. I've had my car on fire twice, both two different cars. One was a Mercury station wagon and one was a Saab. One went up in flames and the other, the plate just burned black, and they told me to save it as a souvenir because it seemed the way the Saab was built, it didn't go up in flames, but the other one almost blew up. And again, a fluke. A man up at Grants Pass at the gas station put his arms around me and the person I was with and said, "You were really meant to live," because at that point it was raining and a rainbow came out, and somebody behind us had helped put out the fire, and we weren't blown up. I've seen my best friends, such as Louise James, her mind drugged, the same kind of acid trip that Marvin got, memory erased, dropped her political activity, and we'll do a little more about Louise too, because I was close to her in the Carmel area. Up in Canada this summer, we parked by a lake coming home outside of Washington. We were in Washington State and got this huge 4-inch bolt that ripped a brand new tire. It's about a quarter of an inch wide, and I have it hanging from a ribbon in my kitchen as a souvenir, because again, when we got to the gas station, they said they had never seen anything like this. It wasn't pointed, it wasn't like a nail. It was just a huge bolt, which they believed probably had to be placed backward or forward onto the tires, so that we had a tent trailer that you park and then your car pulls forward because the sides of the tent trailer come down and there's no space because the back of the car is there. And then in the morning you back up to attach it. So whether you go forward or backward, there was somebody outside the tent at 6 in the morning, and my niece heard it, and she was yelling, and my daughter said, "Shut up," and she said, "No, there's noise," and she heard somebody opening and closing the food box, and she heard this noise, and it was cold and kind of dark. We went back to sleep till 7, and we weren't on the road 20 minutes when our tire was low, and we were aware of the fact that it wasn't completely flat. The bolt was so big it didn't make it flat, but it was a new tire before we left, and it had to be wrenched out, and the tire was thrown away. It couldn't be patched in any way. So we have a souvenir. There was a man that pulled up next to us where we camped who had a sheriff. He was campaigning for somebody for sheriff of the area. I don't know whether it was himself or a friend, and they pulled up and printed the letter, a copy of the letter of the death threat I got from Sandra Good. That was in 1975 when I was comparing the roots of the SLA to the Manson family and the origins of their being formed by the intelligence, the Pentagon, and the COINTEL programs. Sandra Good was telephoning me and writing me letters and threatening me with being killed by the Manson family. I've had planes where cancellations took place that malfunctioned. One out of Sacramento that would have held up a trip to New York. I had to go the next day, and another one in Chicago O'Hare Airport where we were ready to board, and a TWA was malfunctioning, and we had to wait, and they took the luggage off and brought new meals in and changed planes, and general commotion. And when we went to where we were supposed to be to line up for the next plane, they had another plane listed, and we were running all over the airport in general confusion. I've had the home burglarized, correspondence with Clarence Kelly removed, and film clips from the Howard Hughes mystery were destroyed. I went down to Los Angeles to make scenes, the opening and closing scenes of that movie, and then they were physically destroyed, taken to the lab and physically destroyed. And Emmanuel Zacina the producer decided to remake those scenes, and this time I did it with an actor who's on the Love Boat. I forget his name. We did the scenes again, and then once again he had trouble, and now I understand that he's ready to get back and do it again, and he's determined to get the movie out.
Okay, so Jason, the clips just ended. Sorry you couldn't hear that.
Oh, no, it's all right. You played all three of them in a row?
Uh-huh.
Okay. No wonder it took so long. That's not a big deal. No, but those are just some of the things that she went through. She has a whole, hour on it, going chronologically, being chased through the streets after being, handed certain documents about, they were called the Gemstone Files, and mostly what those turned out to be was, a timeline of, oil conglomerates and people who are taking over supposed shadow government, entities, corporations, and a lot of it was turned out to be made up. Some things were true in it, but a lot of it, was added to over the years. But she had gotten one of the original copies by the guy who wrote the Gemstone File, which was before that was, I think, known as the Gemstone Papers. And so, a lot of early stuff like that. But she went into how she got to a car chase. When she met that guy, she would talk about how she was a guest on a radio show one night, and whenever she would go to this particular radio station at night, there was always a man parked in the parking lot, and he was always standing outside waiting for her. And when she would come out after the show into the parking lot, he would approach her and hand her his card and introduce himself, but would just follow her around till she got in the car and drove off. She was warned at one point that a house was going to be built across the street from her, and it was going to be a CIA house, and to watch out. And that later out turned out to be true. There was a house built across the street from her, and ironically enough, the night she died, that same house burned to the ground. So she even cited on a radio show a lot of agents, what she called agent provocateurs, in the neighborhood around her. Described, how to pick them out. They're not part of society, sort of thing. They keep to themselves. She said, I was in one gentleman's house, one neighbor's house, and he's, an agent, and another one had come into his house, and he didn't know who I was. He must have thought I was one of them because he just got done saying that, hey, I just got done, staking out the hippies, for 2 weeks, and I smoked their grass and did their drugs, and now I'm getting shaved and cleaned up, and now me and the boys are headed back to make a bust. I mean, these guys were doing that on purpose back, way back then. Same stuff that they do, probably maybe not now, but hey, back then it was, something else. So.
And we hear these stories quite often about people who have come out with information about so many different things and being mysteriously killed all of a sudden. It just kind of makes you scratch your head and say, what is exactly going on here?
Well, I never said she was. I'm just saying her death was mysterious. When she has people on like Louis Tackwood from Squad 19 in the early 70s, he was and he wrote a book called The Glass House Tapes, and he was an informant for the Los Angeles Police Department, and he was rated 14 in the nation's top agent provocateurs. Well, there was a plan to kill Nixon during the 72 election, so Agnew would get in there, and he was supposed to be in on it. Well, he's the one that blew the whistle on it and wrote a book about it and everything, and Mae Brussels interviewed him about that whole situation. So she had a lot of characters on there at the time. She interviewed Preston Gilroy, the arresting officer for Charles Manson. She did a lot of Manson work. Manson was not a hippie. He referred to them as slippies, actually.
Oh, wow.
And what a lot of people do not know about Manson is this. See, through Nicholas Schreck's work in his interview with Charlie from 1985 until his death, coupled with Brussels Mae's research, you can kind of form a more clear picture. And I'll Reader's Digest version it for the audience because, there's so much to it. But basically what you have going on here, Manson, when he gets out of prison, he's not familiar with, the culture. When you see Manson in his interviews and he says, I get out of jail in 57 and things are going nah, he's talking about the rate of living, the pace of living. The music is slower, jazz, rock and roll. I come out in 67 and everything's like going crazy. Wow, there's a war going on. Wow. Well, how he got to know, according to Nicholas Schreck, where to go in the entertainment industry. See, those guys in prison, it's an underworld in there. They know everybody. Where do you go for a job when you get out of prison? Who can I turn to? I don't know anybody. Well, so his mob connections, he knew mob people in prison. Well, they told him where to go. Terry Melcher over there in Hollywood. And so that's what he did. He went to see Terry Melcher. He got to know Dennis, maybe not in that order, but gets in front of Terry Melcher, meets Dennis Wilson, and he actually cut a record. Well, a lot of people don't know, Manson's record was supposed to debut in the summer of '69. It was already recorded in July of '69. I think that's when Manson got involved with shooting Lots of Papa, one of these drug dealers in Hollywood. Well, he thought he killed him. Well, he didn't. Ended up, Manson didn't kill him, but for a few days in Hollywood in the underground there, a lot of people thought Manson killed him. Well, he didn't. Well, when Terry Melcher and Dennis Wilson hear about this, well, we got to distance ourselves from this guy. And where the Manson family came about, according to Manson and Nicholas Schreck's interview with him, was, well, when we were doing the music and had the record about to ready to be released, this is Manson talking, he says they were going to do a film, to introduce us. He says, because their idea was to bring the counterculture to the music scene. And it is even stated, Dennis Wilson stating in certain rock magazines, that Manson is the up-and-coming sound for the 70s. So there was backing of him. He wasn't a drifter who didn't have any talent. He wasn't a Satanist worshiping Satan. All that was made up by the DA and Atkins and all this, according to, the research of, between these two people. So when that happened with Lots of Papa, then you had the massacre. Those were all basically drug deals gone bad, because Jay Sebring was dealing drugs to the Hollywood types, the musicians, the actors, the actresses. Ironically, it was they tried to make sure that Sharon Tate wasn't going to be there that night, because they didn't want somebody famous going down. Because what happened was this: the whole Tate LaBianca thing. Now, a lot of people have a difficulty believing it was just a drug deal gone bad, but that's what these people did. Atkins and the whole bunch, Manson notwithstanding, they were drug dealers. Tex Watson, Jay Sebring, all of them. They knew each other. They knew these people. They weren't strangers. So what happens is, Tex Watson gets a batch of what then was like a different form of ecstasy. Well, he gives it to a biker group called the Straight Satans. Straight Satans buy this off of them. Well, the Straight Satans get real sick. Makes them real sick. Well, they get angry and they want their money back. And they're going after Tex. Well, so they give him some money. Well, that didn't satisfy, the Straight Satans. Manson gave them cars. That didn't satisfy him. So that's where we hear in the interviews where Manson says, I don't care, get me my money. I don't care how you do it, just get it. He wasn't saying, go out and kill him. Because Tex was saying, well, how do you want me to get the money? How do you want me to pay off the Straight Satans? And Manson's like, I don't know, just get me out of the situation. Just however you got to do it. So their idea was just to rob the LaBiancas, in Sebring rather, I mean, it wasn't an idea to go in there and, helter-skelter everybody. That wasn't on the agenda, so to speak. So when they went in there and did that, obviously they were spun out on drugs, LSD tripping. So the rest, I guess, is history. Sharon Tate ended up being there, and it turned out into a rage. But the murders took place over several hours, not 20 minutes, like a lot of researchers say. So between Mae Brussels and Nicholas Schreck's work with the research, the Manson thing, like I said, he was there after the fact because he went and he helped clean up, but he didn't kill anybody. He was angry because Tex Watson again got him in trouble. He says, "Look, man, I got a record deal. There goes my record deal." Not that he really, that was his first and foremost thing.
Yeah.
According to him, according to him, it was nice, but he didn't want to be a slave to that thing either. But he just didn't want to go back to jail. He was on probation and all this. He says, "Now you're dragging me into this thing." So he already knew he was going back. Manson didn't get a fair trial. He didn't even get to talk to the jury. The jury wasn't even in the room when he made his statement. And the whole helter-skelter thing was made up by Susan Atkins and the DA. It was really Patricia Krenwinkel and Tex Watson massacre. It was the two people that really did it. But nobody ever talks about those culprits. It wasn't, helter-skelter was an after-the-fact thing. They were trying to frame the Canadian drug dealers that they got the drugs from. They were trying to make it look like somebody else did it, not the blacks or not some race war. All that was, made up to, get a lighter sentence. I mean, you're facing a death penalty at the time in California. Of course you're going to say anything, to not die in the electric chair.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was so much of an MK Ultra thing as a lot of people allege. I think there might be factions, questionable things to it. I mean, why did Tex Watson meet with the attorney X amount of times before all this happened? I forget the guy's name, but things like that to the story. But you notice a pattern in these things that these agencies and these people still use now today. That the public eats up, the single shooter lone shooter theory. Oh my God, I'm not going to even go there. That's a whole for a different night. But either way, it's her research is pretty good.
Yeah, like you were saying earlier, she kind of paved the way for others in the conspiratorial field.
Mm-hmm. I like she gives a real definition of what the 60s were all about, because in one of her shows she says, and I'll quote her because it's so nice, because for people who didn't live in the 60s or grow up in the 60s, she does a very good job in describing the cultural shifts of the day. Just like as we can describe the digital tech, we all remember what it was like living without cell phones and rotary phones or whatever have you. But she goes on to say, she says, "I knew in the summer of 1967 that this was the spring when it was happening, that something very big in the United States was coming to a head, because I live in the peninsula here and I'm close to a movement that was growing, going back and forth from San Francisco to Big Sur, spending my summers at Sur. I could see something really good in a true Judeo-Christian tradition of people making it, sharing their housing, sharing their food, wrapping. I realized that in this country we had a revolution. There was a revolution of hairstyle, clothing, cosmetics, transportation, housing, value systems, churches. There was an economic revolution. It affected the cosmetic industry, canned foods, grocery revolution, dietary habits, dwellings, the use of land, no longer needing dwellings, meeting outdoors, no high rent for each separate family, sharing one place. People were delivering their own babies instead of spending $250 for the obstetrician. They were recycling old clothes, going to the Goodwill, making their own things, wearing burlap, sharing, doing, going without, doing without, withdrawing from spectator sports or amusements. They weren't sitting and watching people throw a pigskin ball back and forth. These are revolutions, economic and sociological. They were breaking the boundaries where white and black could rap. They lived together. They slept together. You didn't know somebody's background, if they were rich or poor, if they were Jew or Gentile. Those boundaries were thrown out the window in 1967. Greece was putting them back in, but America was throwing them out the window. And the country club thing was going by the wayside. Zoning laws were ignored. If you have a zoning place in a fancy residential area, the children are leaving those homes. They are living where there is no zoning. They are up on the land in the communes. They've left their parents and their big homes, and they leave the zoning laws behind. They just split. Real estate values are affected because the kids aren't going to buy the house with the picket fence any longer and live two people in that dwelling. Now, this was an economic, sociological necessity in our system as it existed in terms of capitalists and where to survive. And the Rand Corporation and other think tanks in America decide what to do for the United States of America. This was the year for the Beatles. It was the summer of Sgt. Pepper, the Monterey Pop, Haight-Ashbury, the Renaissance, make your own candle, turn off your electricity, sit down, turn on with your friends, and wrap it over. What is life about? The generation was born with an atomic bomb over their head. They weren't going to live long anyway, so there wasn't that much time for hate. They were really making it. My car was filled with kids, hitchhikers, everywhere. I picked up strangers off the street. They slept in our home, slept in the yards too. Monterey Pop came that weekend. We were there every day, and I picked people up off the road, and our house was filled. It was the most beautiful thing. I still have a yard full of furniture that they all painted the chairs and tables, and everyone pitched in. It was human beauty, and they were making it together. But that isn't the way it was meant to be by U.S. Steel and General Motors and Kaiser Aluminum. They want to sell you your own car, your own house, and your own washing machine and dryer. So in my cross-filing system, because you see, this is the summer of 1967, and I've been on assassinations for 4 years. So she was explaining what got her into it, and she's explaining the landscape, and she knew something big was happening, prior to the whole, Manson thing. She knew that somehow the government would use something to bring it all to an end. It was kind of it was from one of the broadcasts. I think it was from 1971.
Yeah, and she was so good at painting a picture, but and the government is so good at having us turn a blind eye to things that are right in front of our face, and especially these days, if you just apply yourself and go onto these different sites all over the world, there's so many things that you can find and realize.
Well, the connections that she would make between people, I guess what one would call a plant. I don't know if they would be an agent or a contract agent or a subvert, but you call it a gatekeeper, call it somebody who would sway public opinion. But in this instance, she's talking about the first story about the Sharon Tate murder. And everything, and I call it the Oswald Manson connection. Oddly enough, because her research on the connection is pretty good. And let me just read it because it's actually not that long. But she says it's very interesting in my research on the assassinations that the very first man to publish an article on the Sharon Tate murder in my collection of murders before they had a suspect. The murders were in August, and they found the suspects in December, was a man named Ed Butler. In October 1969, he wrote an article. The man who publishes the newspaper that he writes for is Patrick Frawley of Schick, Razor, and Technicolor, who is one of the third largest supporters of Richard Nixon, a far right-wing person. And he hires Ed Butler to write an article for him. Ed is an agent provocateur who worked with Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans. When Oswald had the cover story that he was a communist, Ed Butler made a record for him. This was when Oswald said he was a member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and he was the only member of the New Orleans area, and Ed Butler knew it. Ed Butler worked with Lee Harvey Oswald, so it's interesting. It's interesting that in 1969, the first person who has an opinion on who murdered these 7 people would be Ed Butler. in my collection of articles we have at Butler. Now, what is this article called? It says, Did Hate Kill Tate? And he goes into the fact that the Black Panthers are tied to the communists, and the evidence is that the Black Panthers killed these people. They came into middle-class America and spread terror. So that was the very first article about the Sharon Tate thing. It was blamed on the Black Panthers. Written by the guy who, worked with Lee Harvey Oswald. How many...
They were trying to make it a war of color, blacks against whites and whatnot.
Well, no, but look, what I'm saying, you're missing the point. Look at Ed Butler. He works with Lee Harvey Oswald, and now he's writing an article where people are going to read about Manson. So now he can write whatever he wants, whatever narrative he likes about Manson.
Yeah.
There's really that's somebody else's thing about the Black Panthers. There's no evidence for that at all. But he plants a story right there. But see how many. Do you see the connection? The tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. That's just I don't know. How odd would that be? I guess to me it's odd. I guess, but.
Yeah, there's a lot of things out there that just really blow your mind, and how people don't, generally pick up on those things.
Yeah, well, she had one interesting thing, and I can't remember the exact quote, but she had so many copies of every time a new edition of the Warren Report would come out, she would get it. Well, in one of the forewords, she read this on the air, one of the forewords, it said something about the assassination, and she kind of flipped her lid. She says, well, she went back in her files, and it turns out the day after the assassination of John F. Kennedy was the same paragraph in the Dallas Morning Herald, or whatever newspaper it was, that was in years later in the Warren Commission foreword. Same wording, same everything, the same paragraph. And she says, well, if they knew then in 1963 the conclusion, here you find it again in I think it was late 60s, early 70s by this time this version of the Warren Report came out. Because not many people talk about the original 26 volume and reading it. I don't know of any modern researcher that have actually sat down and read the whole 26 volumes and everybody's testimony and used these testimonies to back up their I guess, research. It's a lot of work. It took 8 years for Mae Brussels. How long, it's dedication when you do these sorts of things.
Yeah, and she was so great at what she did.
Yeah. And and sadly enough, she's being pulled from YouTube because of copyright. But the thing is, there's no copyright on her shows. She even says that herself. She even encouraged people to tape her shows and copy them, pass them, or make a small business out of it, just as long as the word got out. Because after, I think KLRV in California, that's where she was, the station she was out of for, I think, 11 years. That station was sold. She mailed out her cassette tapes, through the mail, through subscriptions. And then, it was also got picked up on, local radio by KAZU in, I think, 1982. But, she goes into John Belushi's death. She even met John Lennon, and John Lennon funded Paul Krasner. He had a magazine called The Realist, and he owed the publisher $5,000. So John Lennon went to the bank and withdrew $5,000 out and helped Paul Krasner get The Realist out of the hole. So interesting little story about John Lennon helping out the movement back in the day. And she spent the day with John and Yoko Ono because they were considering staying down there near her home at the time. So I forget what reason it was for. But they ended up not staying there. But she told him, hanging out with them and things like that.
So you had mentioned John Belushi, and I know you were saying it has been talked about so much, but I'm a real fan of him.
Well, not him. Not him specifically was talked about so much because we don't hear too much about his death. But from what I can remember, because I don't have it out in front of me, I mean, I could try here real quick. But she did some research on him, covered his death, and she goes into a very good chronological order of what the newspapers were saying about the death of John Belushi, because at first it was natural, no signs of foul play, no drugs or anything like that. Then as the days in the week progressed, suddenly the newspapers were saying that he, there was needle marks, he was a slob, he was this. It was totally untrue. The lady that was with him said that she ordered breakfast for him like at 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and he was visibly sick, and he was foaming at the mouth when she left. And then when she came back around 10 or 10:30, she ordered breakfast again. Basically waited till he was good and dead and left him again, and left him for his bodyguard, I think, to find him. I think that's pretty much the Reader's Digest version. I'm pulling up more of the...
And you said she actually ordered and ate breakfast? That is pretty dark.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the information on it now because there's so much to it. But he was working on a movie at the time called Noble Rot, basically about a three-letter agency. I think a CIA guy who was a drug dealer, and some people think that was maybe one of the reasons why his suspicious death, so to speak. I don't want to say he was murdered. I'm not going to go that far, but nobody likes jokes about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'm skipping through to trying to go down to the meat of the story about. Let's see. Here's something interesting. This is from her broadcast. It says 3 nights before Belushi died, he was on Los Angeles Boulevard near Wilshire, just bordering Beverly Hills. He was with a cab driver who gave an interview. It was late at night. They were sitting at a counter at a sandwich shop, and there was a newspaper there. They were both looking at it, and he asked Belushi, "What sport do you want, sports, entertainment, or El Salvador?" And Belushi said, "I want El Salvador." He went on to say that he hated what he read in the news, that he hated Hollywood. They're a bunch of pricks. "I want to get back to New York City," and he said he wanted to stay there. They went to Belushi's car where he had a lot of cocaine in the glove compartment, but the driver said Belushi was unhappy, fearful for his environment, and he wanted to get back to New York. I think about that describes it. There was another article published about him that he didn't want to stay in Hollywood. The last night before he died, Belushi said to somebody, "I'm going home to Judy tomorrow." That's his wife in New York. "I want to get out of here." I'm sure that he sensed some danger, just as Elvis Presley was poisoned until he died, or John Lennon was kept secluded and isolated in an apartment. And the minute he emerged, he died. Belushi, when he was in Hollywood, was bounced around the drug scenes and a lot of hard people, a very sleazy element that could trap him later. He expressed the idea that he would leave the next day, evidently drop the movie and go back to New York. But that next day never came. He hired bodyguards. The studios wanted to keep him from using cocaine. If he did indeed have it, they wanted to have him clean. Well, Nelson Rockefeller, Vice President of the United States, had bodyguards who weren't around when he died. Robert Kennedy had a bodyguard, Dane Caesar from Lockheed, who was behind him when the fatal bullets were delivered to the back of his head. Bodyguards often let people through the door who shouldn't be there. It's a question of the agencies that employ them. Who was looking after Belushi? 2 nights before, someone came to his home, Evelyn Smith, the same woman who would be with him when he died. She was kicked out. She reappears. And she's the one of the major suppliers of drugs to the Hollywood stars. Her behavior at the death scene was questionable. Not only was supplying narcotics a crime, but not calling 911 or the police or the hotel desk is irresponsible. She was there when he died, went away for a couple of hours, returned. Smith didn't call anyone. She let the bodyguard, who appeared at 12:30 p.m., find the body, even though Belushi was dead when she walked out. So again, who were the security guards? Another article in the paper. John Belushi felt tragically alone. He was paranoid that he was being used. It's probable that ever since he appeared on Saturday Night Live and did impressions of famous people, he was placed on an enemies list. He was that political. The last performance of Saturday night's original group was so radical, a friend asked me how they got away with it. The next day, the whole group was fired, and it was reported that they were too political. The whole group was broken up. Sure, he was followed and used by people. I'm sure that he was prepared by this milieu around him to be done in if he continued to be political. So, and she kind of goes on from there. And then more detail about the morning. They said that he ordered breakfast, whole wheat toast and jelly, a pot of coffee, and freshly squeezed orange juice. He had breakfast on the terrace. Now, Evelyn Smith ordered the breakfast, and at 10:30, when Belushi was nice and dead, she went out for breakfast, she said. But it's obvious that from 6:30 to 8, when it was ordered, he was not in any condition to eat. On Monday, the cause of death was still undetermined. Slides of tissue had been taken, more pathology of the body. Dr. John Holloway, a doctor who worked on the autopsy of Senator Robert Kennedy, entered the case and insisted that parts of the body would have to be removed and internal organs examined to determine if the cause of death was a heart attack. Now, if Belushi overdosed on narcotics and there was a mess of needles, cocaine, and heroin littering the place, as reported 10 days later, the first 5 days it was reported that there were no drugs involved, then the search for a heart attack was superfluous. The doctor from the Robert Kennedy autopsy said that the evidence may not be so visible, so the tissue must be tested and full anatomic evidence presented. It may be myocardial infarction or a coronary attack, Dr. Holloway said, so they weren't so sure. Then she goes on, Tuesday, no comment on Belushi. Second round of tests for toxic substances and evidence of disease on samples of tissue taken. On the sixth day, March 10th, they still didn't know what killed him. There were interviews. The police said that there was a powder resembling cocaine on the nightstand. His body had needle marks likely to be from an intravenous injection of cocaine. 7 days after his death, it was an overdose of drugs. Chief Police Daryl Gates in Los Angeles said that he didn't know about an overdose, that he had been informed that the musician-actor died of natural causes. On this day, signs of drug usage on Belushi's body were being reported, that he had been stuck with a needle. One report stated that there were numerous needle marks. Another one reported only one, and yet another one said that the dark spots were from blood clots. And the official autopsy report came out. And that was the shocker because it contained very little information related to questions that should have been asked. The LA Examiner official report on Belushi's death at 1 a.m. He went into a private bar. He stayed there, was driven back to his room where he vomited and was pale and sweaty. So lots of, I know we're getting down to the wire, but if people want to read about that, there's a whole transcript on it online about Belushi's death and her whole research into it. But that's the most in-depth I've ever heard anybody talk about John Belushi's death. I mean, there was rumors that Dan Aykroyd was there. I don't know if it's true or not, but I know there were some people there in the early morning hours before he died.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very sad indeed. But it's funny how things do get covered up like that, and why not let the truth out? I mean, perhaps family can put certain stipulations on it or whatnot, but it sounds like there were just so many theories and stories and stuff going around. Like, what exactly is the truth? And I don't know. Yeah. And who was that chick again that was with him?
Evelyn Smith. And she later went on to do, according to the article, to do a short talk show circuit, talking about the death of Belushi. How'd she get away with that? You're there when somebody, if I'm there when somebody dies, I'm going to be questioned. I don't know about you. I've been on scenes like that. When somebody, I was there when he died. It was horrible. You should have seen it. somebody's witnessed, there's somebody with whatever. But yeah, she would go into, she had a whole show about the death of rock musicians, and even Freddie Prince. A whole show about Freddie Prince. It was pretty good. So, but like I said, she's a good place to start. If you really want to get into somebody, because I laugh at a lot of comments now on YouTube. You'll see some old interviews with Jim Keith or some of these old researchers, and a lot of people start yelling shill misinformation, and it's like, no, these were some of the original people that were bringing this stuff to light when it wasn't a common everyday thing. When it wasn't a click away, where you actually had to get up off your butt and go down to the library, or order these books, from the bookstore, on these certain subjects.
Well, being that we are down to our last couple minutes, did you want to fill us in on Jack Mackerel?
Oh man! Well, I have to tell the audience, we have. There's been sightings of dogmen in Arizona, according to some accounts that I've researched on. So I have a friend that we joke about going to search for dogman, and he has this insane idea to use a can of Jack Mackerel to attract dogman. And he realizes, you put that stuff out in the desert, you're going to attract every desert animal from 50-mile radius. I just don't think it's probable. I don't, and he takes it as, look, I've died 6 times, and I think being killed by dogman would make a great story. And he is dead serious. And I suppose if you've died six times technically, that's one way of looking at it, and that's one thing that his experience with death has given him, is quite the sense of humor. And he actually tried calling me on one of the commercial breaks. I didn't answer. Well, I didn't want to lose the call. But I know that he was flipping out because of the whole UFO segment. Because he really doesn't like me talking about baritone. He hates it. But what can I say? It's part of the story. It's what Chris told me. So I can't leave it out.
Yeah, and I actually found it quite interesting, to be honest, when you had told me about it before, when I was down in Phoenix visiting. But we are at the end of our time, and kudos to him for wanting to go out with his boots on, Like you said, he's got a great sense of humor and a wonderful personality. So how can people get a hold of you with any questions about Mae or anything else along those lines?
Okay, it's Shemya Case File at Outlook. SHEMYA Case File, all lowercase in one word. Shemya Case File at Outlook.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Jason, for being on. It was wonderful having you on the show this evening, and thanks so much for filling in when our psychic couldn't come.
All right, well, thank you, and I thank your audience for listening in, and thank you everybody out there, and Dan and Melody and all those out there in the radio land.
Awesome. Thanks again, Jason, and you have a good night.
You too.
And thank you to everyone in Spaced Out Radio, Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Paranormal Radio, TalkStream Live, Deep Talk Radio, and wherever else you may be listening in the universe tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and it was my pleasure, literally and figuratively, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend on spacedoutradio.com. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light to all my space cases out there, and like I said in the chat room, we won't be having the after party tonight because I do have a court case I have to go to, so I gotta try to get to bed somewhat early. But don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better, and together, my friends, we own the night. You guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you back here next weekend. Take care.